ألا من كنت مولاه فهذا علي مولاه، اللهم وال من والاه وعاد من عاداه.
David Preston McLean. I now actually go by Brother Dawood. That's since my reversion. I've actually come from a small town called Petrolia. It's about 3.5 hours southwest of here. It's out by the Sarnia, London area. I was basically raised in family, divorced parents. I have 5 oldest stepbrothers and sisters from my stepfather. I have formerly a stepmother that had 2 step sisters as well, and then I have 1 natural sister who is Colleen. None of my family is actually religious in that. Like, I do have my aunt is pretty religious in that. She attends church regularly, but for the most part my family is not very religious in that. I actually went to the church on my own. When I moved in with my grandfather and that, which was around the age of 13, I was in grade 7 at the time, and I started going to the church in my local town and that, and I started going very regularly in that. In fact, I got so far into the church that I did the confirmation when I was 16, which became an actual member of my church. It was St. Ange's Presbyterian. By 17, I actually became a youth minister for them, and I spent both my grade 12 and my OAC years actually running the senior youth groups, running the Sunday school for the senior students, and that just because pretty much nobody else was doing it. I also then organized many other events for them, and I did my co-op through high school with my church and that to get basically for easy grades and that, because I was already doing so much stuff there, so I knew I was going to get it covered and that. So when I was beyond being regular in that, because I was pretty much at the church almost every day. Basically, I think I just needed the message and that was there for me and that, and I needed the community and that. My best friend went to that church, his mother. She kind of became a surrogate mother to me in a lot of ways and that, just kind of the motherly figure that I had in my life. There was also like a lot of others. Had some issues in my life where I kind of felt rejected by a lot of people, and at the church that I found like a lot of people would actually come in and accept me. Like when I did my confirmation, everybody else had their mother and father there and that, and I went up there pretty much by myself. My aunt did come to the church that day for me, so she stood up by me, and then I had 3 other people from the church actually stand up by me to be my surrogate parent for that day and that. So I ended up with 3 mothers and a couple of fathers by the time we got to the confirmation. So I think that part of that community and that part of that family feeling for me was very much so needed in my life, and it was offered to me. Plus I believed. I truly believed in that. I believed Jesus as Son of God and as Lord and Savior in that. And that's why I eventually became a youth minister in that and got that far into the church in that. It was a true out, I actually believed it. All right, as a youth minister, things that I was actually in charge of is 1, I would open up the church. I decided that there just wasn't enough options around our town. Small towns, not much to do in that, so there really wasn't much going on, so I was basically get in trouble or to do something. So I would actually open up the church on Monday nights and that, and what we would do is we'd have like a meeting, decide what we wanted to do for things. Also would have games and so forth that would be there, as well as we made sure there was tutoring for students that needed tutoring to do their homework and that, and basically just had the church open for the kids that wanted to actually go. I organized events such as fundraisers and that, making sure that our youth group, when I was actually running it, was the only time the senior youth group ever put money back into the church rather than taking money out of the church, because we actually had successfully raised enough money. It allowed us to go on camping trips and ski trips. We organized basketball tournaments and that to raise money for the Arthritis Society and that, which was something that was personal to me because that's what my grandma passed away of and that. And so I always made sure, like every time I got a chance to, I organized an event for them and that, and got other youth groups involved as well. Ran the Sunday school. One of the best things about that was I ran into a guy by the name of Edward Spencer. He was, I think, from the Kitchener-Waterloo area, somewhere in there, but he was actually in charge of the Presbyterian Church's youth programs for the whole southwestern Ontario. And when I got to meet him and that, we were looking and shopping in books, basically. We actually ran into these books called talk sheets is what they were, and I loved them because the whole point of them, right in the beginning of the book, and that was you're supposed to talk about the particular topic. It would point to Bible verses and about the topic, but the whole goal was to not actually finish a sheet, to go the whole hour and get a conversation started. And having that for the Sunday school was absolutely awesome. That I don't think we ever finished a sheet, and you got a lot of good conversations out of it, and that it wasn't just about one person sitting there telling everybody what they're supposed to believe and what they're supposed to think. Everyone got a chance to actually give their opinions and their thoughts, and then we could always bring it back to the Bible and back into the teachings, and that was something that I actually enjoyed. As growing up, the more and more I read of it, I started to get a little bit further away from it. I went off to university. Actually, one of the things I did take was a world religion course in that, which is actually where I first got introduced into Islam. It was only a short introduction, and basically I always viewed it as a logical version of Christianity, but without Jesus as God, which at that time I couldn't accept. So he had to still be the center, so I never seriously considered Islam at that point. But the more I read into the Bible and the more I got to know about it, and then the more I studied history, I started to notice a lot of things that didn't make sense to me, and that things that it wasn't about it contradicting each other. It was more about the mixed messages that I found within it, where at one point God loves everyone the same, but then a few verses later, certain people have special gifts given to them, other people can be wiped out, things like that. It's like, he loves us all the same, but we don't all get treated the same. It didn't make sense to me. Then there was just going on and looking at history and that, noticing that there were teachings from Jesus that were actually books written on his life and his teachings that were written by people who actually would have heard him speak. They were that old, but they were not included in the Christian canon. And then books that were written by people who never heard him speak were included. And the problem with these early books was that they didn't give the message that the church wanted. And I couldn't understand, didn't make sense to me that a bunch of people who never heard the message would know more about the message than the people who actually heard the message. And so things like that just kept coming up and all that stuff, and it kept driving me away. My final separation with Christianity itself and it's still a few years before I even considered Islam, was just reading the New Testament and reading about Jesus, and every time he's going, forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they're doing. He's talking to God in the desert and so forth, and it's like, this almost makes God look like he's wandering around like he's crazy, like he's just someone who wants to talk to himself, and that is like, this doesn't make sense. He's talking directly to somebody and it's not himself. And these type of things just kept coming up over and over and over again. Like Satan, he's not dumb, he's a very intelligent being. If Jesus was God, Satan would have never wasted his time trying to tempt him. There would have been no point. It would have been a lost battle from the beginning. These type of things don't make sense. Satan was willing to challenge Jesus because Jesus was a man, not because he was God. And that was just those type of things kept coming up over and over and over again in my mind, to a point where it's like, I really don't believe that this can be correct. Jesus cannot be God. I also encountered another thing. This is like when I went from being a Christian to calling myself a believer. For about 2-3 years, I just associated myself as a believer. And the reason I did that was because God loves us all the same. You can call him God, you can call him Allah, but he loves us all the same. And I asked myself, it is a big deal with putting partners with God, but is he going to be so upset that some people are a little confused and think that Jesus is God? And because that's what they were raised and taught, and then some people don't, and then all the bloodshed that's caused over it. What would be more painful to a loving God? The actual misconception, or the pain, anguish, war, death, bloodshed from it? And I decided that bloodshed's probably a lot worse to him than a misconception that will be clarified upon death anyways. So I started calling myself a believer at that point in time. That was just the way I went. I always had a great resource because of being a former youth minister, so I could always contact old contacts that I had in that. But I got to a point, by the time I was really getting into those misconceptions, I was already gotten away from the church, and I've already gotten away from a lot of other things in that. And I believed, but I wasn't living the life anyways. For me, it was just researching it and seeing it over and over and over again, and having that clarity of mind and thought on it, going, something's not right here. I did a couple of different world studies classes in that throughout my life. Once in university in that, which was in 2000. And then again while I was at Humber College in that, I took another religious study class in that, just for I was looking for an easy marks on a course in that. And so I got introduced to a lot of other religions through that. None of them ever really spoke to me, and that I really only do believe that there's one God. I've never even come close to believing that there's more. I've always lived in that side of it. It starts getting too odd sounding to me to have so many things in that. I knew actually several Muslims before I converted in that. Back in Sarnia, I actually worked with a couple. I had a couple of different jobs that I had. Didn't really know them much. The one I gave a ride to and from work and that from time to time, but that was about it. I really got to make them as friends actually when I came to Humber College, and that the first Muslim I ever called friend was actually a guy by the name of Adder. He's still one of my friends now. We still talk and so forth and that. He was definitely one of the first ones in that. I met a couple of others, sisters and so forth, that I, over time in that, and got to know in that. And yeah, I knew it was, a lot of it was their lifestyle and how happy they were with Islam that made it a lot more interesting to me to actually find out about it. Turning point for me coming Muslim is I was actually going through some harder times in that, just some stuff that had kind of gotten me down in life, and I had looked into Islam before, but it didn't actually happen for me in that, and then I didn't feel it properly. Then the second time when I came along in that, it was like things were just not going right for me in that. I started to actually go, there was a lot of things that I read that I agreed with already, that I had preconceived notions of long before I even opened the Quran and that. And as I got to go back and I started researching this again, then I started practicing prayers, and the more I got to learn about it, I actually started to notice that I was feeling better about everything. There were things that I was struggling with that I stopped struggling with, and that I started to come to understanding with them, and I became at peace with them. I actually, overall, many things in my life I was able to come to grips with, and I actually became very peaceful about. I also had an internal happiness come over me, and I don't laugh and smile as much as I used to, but I used to laugh and smile a lot while being absolutely miserable. Now, I don't feel the need to fake a smile because I'm actually happy on the inside, and that's something, it's just been a great feeling for me. And again, it was just, as I researched, the more and more I researched of it, the more and more it came over me. It was that the prayers, all the peace that just came over me, and that happiness. That's what really brought me towards Islam, and that was what convinced me. Actually, one of the most beautiful parts about Islam that I discovered in that is, as someone who's always come back from a scientific point of view in that, and that studying chemistry, studying physics and that, studying biology, there's always seems to be this conflict between science and faith in that. And one of the absolutely beautiful things about Islam is that we're taught that God is infinite and we are finite. No matter how much we know, we'll never know anywhere near a portion of God. This actually basically makes God unknowable to us, which now makes science much more sensible in that, in the fact that everything we learn, in science, that we're learning about how he created his creation, how his creation works, and that. I found when I was as a Christian in that, God was knowable. Through Jesus and so forth, we knew God. And because of that, everything could be revealed to us, so all the answers were there. In Islam, because of the fact that we accept that God is infinite and that we basically will never fully know and fully understand him, it makes studying science something that we actually should do, not just to do, and it allows us to get us a better knowledge of God and how his creation works, and there is no conflict anymore between faith and science. Religion and culture, it's something that's massively crossed in Islam, and that. For me, I didn't have much of a problem with it, because the more I was learning about the teachings of the Prophet, and as far as the Quran itself and the more women's rights that I saw in that versus what I read about and so forth it was pretty obvious that there was what was the actual teachings versus what's cultural, and that, like, a lot of the oppression of women and all that stuff. Like, for one, let's be honest, Prophet Muhammad, his first wife Khadijah asked him to marry him. That is not a girl that is repressed. That is a girl that is straightforward and strong. She was his employer. This is obviously not what we see when you see women aren't allowed to work, can't do all this and that. That's obviously culture. That's not going to be part of the teachings, because he's not going to tell everyone. He wants you to follow his life. He's an example. If his example was his employer became his wife in that, if she's obviously working, she had so much power and control in that situation, then repressing women is not going to be a part of the actual faith itself. They're not one and the same. So for me to decipher the difference between culture and religion was actually very easy, but it's because I kind of had my eyes open from the beginning on that particular issue of these don't make sense between the teachings and what I see. A friend of mine pointed out that in Mecca, for example, women aren't put behind a screen for prayers. They're in behind, but they pray with the men still. And so when you see all these things and you hear about them all, you know full well that that's, any of that type of stuff is actual cultural, not the faith. So many of the teachings in Islam was about equality, that women are equal to men, and that they have their part and you have your part, and you work together to build your lives. So again, the culture and that, for me, it was very easy and very quick to distinguish between the two. I never once had a problem seeing the differences. Actually, my friend Adder, we went and met up together because I was asking him some questions, and then this is actually when I was first studying into it. I said, yeah, I want to get some more information on Islam and that. Do you want to meet up and talk? So actually himself and his older brother came, and we met up at Tim Hortons that's actually near Humber College. They gave me 2 books that day. One of them was the actual English meaning of the Quran, and they gave me a second book in that. I can't even remember the name of it. I actually was reading both books in that, but that was my first introduction to the Quran in that. When I first started reading the Quran, one of the best parts about it was that within about the first 4 or 5 pages of it, ideas and thoughts that I'd already, and conclusions that I'd already personally come to were right there. So it made it a much easier time for me to actually believe. My Shahada. The day that I was doing the Shahada, I actually had planned out my Shahada from the day that I decided I was going to officially make the reversion. I wanted to, first of all, I had a group of people who had helped me out and answered a lot of my questions. I wanted to have those people there as my witnesses. I just didn't want it to be some random person that came off and that. I actually want them there. So I had planned my Shahada out. First thing I had to do was I had to wait for a friend to get back in the country because she was out. And then I scheduled for the one day. Someone couldn't make it, so we had to cancel it. Scheduled again. I had a work issue, and I got frustrated finally. And I basically went in on the Monday and said, I just got to get this over and done with. Everybody, we're just going to meet tomorrow night, and we're going to do this. And that's how I decided the night that I was going to do it. We were actually supposed to go to Afi's and that for dinner, and that's where I was going to do the Shahada. But we actually had more people show up than I had reserved for, so they didn't have space for us. We ended up going to another restaurant called Karamaya. And we had an absolutely great time. The meal was awesome. We had a lot of fun. There was a lot of good conversation. And then came time to do the Shahada. And that I had my Syed, one of the brothers who helped me out a lot. He went through with me and guided me in that. I had a few other people there as well. Miriam, who was there as well, she had already gone over earlier in the day with the actual words and practiced the Arabic with me. So it was just an amazing night. Like, it was one of the best nights of my life. I also had not only my Muslim friends, but my best friend was there with his wife. She came along and that. She was at first hesitant, but she decided she was going to do it because it was to support me. And they also had their newborn son, and Hunter was there. So I got to have all of them there as well and that. And it was a great night. Like, it was by far one of my favorite memories. Actually, when I first started studying and looking into it, the first family member I revealed to was actually my sister, and that Colleen, my natural sister, and that I knew that she'd be more accepting of the things that I was doing, and she would understand that I actually was taking it serious and that I was studying it. She basically went along with it. She talked to me, she supported me, and she began to study herself a little bit just so she kind of knew where I was coming from. The next family member that I decided to reveal to was my mother. And the reason I decided to reveal to my mother second was because of the teaching of who should you love first? Your mother. Who should you love second? Your mother. And so on. That was the reason why I decided that I needed to have a relationship with her if I was actually going to convert to Islam. And so I revealed to her that I was actually thinking about converting, and that I started spending a lot more time trying to make sure I had good communication with her, talking to her, making sure I visit her at Christmas and so forth and that, and making sure that she was somewhat a part of my life and that again, and that as part of my conversion and that. So she was the second one. I revealed directly to my aunt for personal reasons and that, and then I pretty much from there, Facebook and everything else became so obvious and that, so pretty much all my family knows and that for the most part and that, but those were the 3 that I actually directly spoke to and revealed to before I made it very public that I was converting. At first, my mom was really skeptical in that. She was like, why? Like, she didn't understand Islam very well, and I had to go through and start explaining a lot of things to her and that. And then after a while, she was able to, start to catch on to the information and that, and she softened up her point of view to a point where she did become very supportive. My aunt, she was a very strong believer in that, in Jesus and as God and so forth, and being a Christian. She said she didn't understand my decision, but she respects it, and she'll support me only. And that was as far as that went on that one, and that was, that was good enough for that. She respected my decision and that, and she still supports me, and I never had any of the family issues that I've heard with many other reverts and that. My family never tried to disown me for that particular reason. And then just things went smooth for me on that part. Actually, when I first started speaking to my friends about it and that, my best friend obviously was first and foremost in that, very supportive and that. Then again, he's known me my whole life and that. He knows that I don't take anything lightly when it does come down to my faith and religion. That I've always been strong to my faith in that, and I've always kept myself into a certain light. So when I told him that I was actually looking into it and that I was getting ready to revert, he was actually quite supportive of it and that. Same with his wife. All my friends in that, when I talked to them, they were curious, but they were supportive. I've only had one or two that kind of were hesitant on it, that, you know, they want to make fun of it or things like that, but they think all religions are kind of odd and so forth. So I've come to the point where their opinions are like, they're friends, but I don't get too big. They're not, what they think about it isn't really my concern anymore in that. It's their concern, that's their weaknesses, that's their problems. So, and the rest of my friends fully supportive of it. My first year as being a Muslim and I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary pretty soon. It's been, at first it was really easy because going through Ramadan, Muslim community was very close in that, and then it was around September or so, then people started disappearing and all that stuff, and it started getting just a little bit more difficult to find it. And that's pretty much what happened for me, was that once I got a little bit further away, getting busy into my own life and everyone else getting busy into their own life again and that, I found it started to get a little bit harder to keep within the faith in that. I've done a relatively good job of it. I've had some weak moments, but at the same time, things have gone pretty well, good for me in that. I've been very lucky. I've had Brother Syed a lot of times in that, like no more than a month would we go without actually talking, getting together for dinner so that we could discuss Islam and that. I was connected to a group called Islam 114. They actually helped me out a lot as well, and I was able to get a lot of information through them. Other reverts would come in, they'd want me to be a part of that as well and that, just because they were there for mine. So it's been more difficult after, like, studying for it was a lot easier than since I've had it, but at the same time, the information's there, the people are there, and it's really about me getting the studying in myself and that, and it's been a great year. Like, there's been a lot of personal things in that, but as far as that goes, but as far as my faith goes, it's been awesome. Support from the Muslims is actually quite easy to get in that. One thing about it, when even people who don't know you find out that you're a revert, the excitement that they get, they want to talk to you. Having the support from the regular Muslims is something that it's very easy to get. There's a lot of them out there. I've met people over the years and that. I've met lots of people over the last year and that, and I still have lots of communication with them and that. Like, I do use more social media and that for it and that. But yeah, no, support from the Muslim community is they're very supportive. Like, just as much so as I would say that my Christian church was, and that I have just as much support in that. It's just as strong as a family in that. If you need help, you mention it. I've had conversations with people, things come up and that someone found out something that happened to me and that, and all of a sudden I'm getting phone calls at 12 o'clock at night just to make sure things are okay, even though we barely know each other and that, just because we happen to both be Muslim and that. So yes, I find the community is very strongly, it's very supportive here, and at least in the Toronto GTA area. With born Muslims and that, I think sometimes they forget that with the reverts and that, we don't know everything. We're still learning a lot of stuff. Like, they were born and raised into it. And so there's a lot of things that they just do naturally in that I don't know any better than, and I need to have guidance. Sometimes they lose, just sometimes I forget that. I also notice too is that born Muslims, they're like anyone else, just like Christians. Some follow and practice, some do not. You just have to pay attention to who's who and support each other all the way along in that. My interaction with them is just the same as it is with my Christian friends and everyone else. Since I've converted, I personally do not seem to have a difference in my interactions with people than I ever did before. I actually, although I did the Shahada at the end of Ramadan last year, I did go through Ramadan I did go through it last summer and that, and it was actually an amazing experience for me. It was a lot of fun. Like, I had a ton of fun during Ramadan last year and that, with working with all the iftars and all that. It was just so enjoyable in that, going this place, that place, eating with this friend, eating with that friend, going out for this community center, that community center, seeing what this mosque does and that. Like, everyone was trying to get me a part of it and that, because although I wasn't Muslim yet and that, they knew I was getting ready to convert, and I think everyone wanted to be a part of that. So there was a lot of people were very excited about getting me to their house for iftars and that, and I had an absolute blast with it. How has Islam changed my life? The one thing about it is that the faith itself, sometimes it gets a little bit hard to practice, not with praying 5 times a day and that, but the one thing that has changed in my life is I'm happy. And that's the only thing I can really explain. I'm not in as good a position in so many ways to where I used to be, but I'm happier now than I've ever been. And I can't express how much that actually means in that. And that's what Islam has been for me and in my life, is that it has given me a lot more peace and a lot more happiness. And that really is what it comes down for me. I was blessed in the fact that I did not have any difficulties when I was trying to convert into Islam, and that there was, for me, I could get the information. I had lots of resources. I had lots of people who were interested in helping me out with it, and I had lots of desire to learn it. There really was no issue for me with my actual conversion. It was just a question of reaching that point where I truly believed. Once I was able to reach that point where I truly believed, I got blessed. I was never once had any problems along the route towards conversion. Advice for people who are looking to revert in that, basically research, study, and build strong connections to your community and that with the Muslims around you and that. Make lots of friends, learn the cultures and that. Get a mosque that you're going to be comfortable with going to a fair bit, but also be comfortable going to other mosques as well to study and learn. And be willing to learn from other people and that. But basically just get that community involvement, get yourself connected to a few people that are actually going to be able to help you out. Friends and so forth is going to be very important into keeping you into the faith and help guiding you along the way. For the viewers who are already Muslim, one of the things that I have noticed over the last year is I've gotten better information from the regular Muslims than I have from even some of the scholars in that. I've discovered over the years, over this last year, that sometimes when you're speaking to scholars, it's like they're speaking from a textbook and that it's kind of dry, it's not very passionate. But when you speak to the regular Muslims, I've discovered there's so much more passion about it, there's so much more love, there's so much more conviction. And for those out there and that, you may not know all the information, but if you're truly passionate about it, spread that information, feel comfortable spreading that information and talk about it with people. Don't hide it. Don't say, well, I'm not the scholar, I'm not the expert, so I can't really give that answer to that. If you're passionate about Islam and you actually do love the faith in that, speak up. Because your passion will do more for somebody who's brand new than a dry textbook scholar talking to them, telling them all the right answers and that, but not giving that love, that feeling, that emotion. When you have it, share that. And that will make it a lot easier for reverts and for the general spreading of the faith and for the understanding in that. You live your life and you're happy with your life, those who are watching, they're going to notice that. And that's what's going to attract them to Islam.